believe of indivisible. So you will not want to miss that talk with the indivisible folks. So today we have Wes Prichard. He is from FFR, Freedom From Religion Foundation. His talk today, Do Moderate Christians See the Threat of Christian Nationalism? Wes and his wife, who is here, she was here. Okay, she'll pop in. Yep. He and his wife have lived in Colorado Springs for over 35 years. After retiring from a career in electrical engineering, to the double E's in the room, in high tech in 2024, he co-founded a new local chapter of the FFRF to resist a growing movement to dissolve the wall of separation between church and state. Wes is an avid cyclist and a board member for Bike Colorado Springs, and he also volunteers with El Paso County Extension as a Colorado Master Gardener. So please welcome Wes.
All right, thanks, Rob. We'll get the slides up first. I do have a few slides, but I'll approach those as we get into the session. Good morning, everybody. I'm glad to see you all. I thought, with the weather today, there might be an intimate conversation of 5-0s here, so it's nice to see some faces out. And I know our plants, trees are definitely getting a shock today. That we're still in winter. It's not quite spring yet, even though we've been had some really warm weather and more coming this week. So I don't know what's going to happen to the trees. They may just give up and go home. But also happy Pi Day yesterday. Glad to hear several of you are enjoy Pi Day. We hope hopefully you did something fun like make some crop circles or something like that. Cheryl and I had our neighbors over for PIE pie, so that was fun. Like doing that. But as Rob mentioned, I'm Wes Prichard. I'm president of the local chapter of Freedom From Religion Foundation. We call our local chapter FFRF Pikes Peak Region. So definitely thanks to Rob for the invitation to talk with you today. If you're not familiar with FFRF, it's the nation's largest free thought association, and its purpose is to promote the constitutional principle of separation of state and church and to educate the public on matters relating to non-theism. Now, my father, if he were alive today, would be so proud that I'm talking to you here in this lovely church building. I think he secretly hoped that I would become a pastor, but alas, I turned out to be a non-theist humanist. So that didn't quite work out. But both of my parents were very dedicated to and involved in their church. My mom's still going at 90. I spent my formative years growing up in the moderate Protestant denomination called Christian Church Disciples of Christ. It was First Christian Church here in town. And I can draw on that background when needed, but it's also been 30 years since I've been involved in a church, so I'm here to get some input from you today. And I do want this to be a conversation. For today's talk, I'm going to describe what I see as the threat of Christian nationalism. And then I would like to get that input from you. I have some discussion questions that we'll get into. I'm going to start by sharing some information to provide a basis for that discussion. Feel free to ask any clarifying questions if needed, but I'll park any discussion questions until the end. I'll cover my material in about 30 minutes, leaving us another 30 minutes for discussion. So I'm comfortable talking to you folks here at First Congregational about Christian nationalism because I know you already get it. This church sponsored a public series on Project 2025 last year and also on free speech. So I run the risk of preaching to the choir, if you will pardon the expression, but it's because of your awareness and openness that I can talk to you today about this topic. So I want to start with a recent event to highlight the state of church-state separation in our country today. Just last month, on February 5th, the chief executive of the executive branch of our federal government, I think you know who I'm speaking of, spoke at the National Prayer Breakfast. Now, this is an event that, in my view, should not happen at all, and especially with the involvement of senior government leaders, but that's another story. This year, there were actually 2 prayer breakfasts. One was coordinated by the Fellowship Foundation and held at a hotel. The other was chaired by 2 U.S. congressional representatives and held at the Capitol. The president attended the one at the hotel and spoke for more than an hour. Now, here's a few quotes from his remarks that I will read verbatim as transcribed by rollcall.com. There are 15 different quotes, so bear with me, but this will be illuminating. And as you know, the president's phrasing can sometimes be awkward. All right, number 1. You know, I've done more for religion than any other president. 2. We're trying to pass voter ID and other things having to do with your religion. 3. ISIS rebuilt. And they have a little bit of ISIS now again. And we knocked the hell out of them the other day in Nigeria because they're killing Christians. Number 4. To be a great nation, however, I think, and I may be wrong, but I don't think so, because I've watched a lot and I study a lot. Period. You have to have religion, you have to have it, you have to have faith, you have to have God. Number 5. I'm pleased to announce that on May 17th, 2026, that we're inviting Americans from all across the country to come together on our national mall to pray, to give thanks, and to we are going to do something that everyone said, like, that's tough, period. We're going to rededicate America as one nation under God. You know, a lot of people, yeah. This is like David Letterman's countdown. Remember when we used to have that? Number 6. I've always said you just can't have a great country if you don't have religion. You have to believe in something. You have to believe that what we're doing, there's a reason for it. There has to be a reason for it. We're all working and we're behaving. I mean, I behave because I'm afraid not to, okay? Because I don't want to get in trouble. All right. Number 7. Things are happening in our country right now, and we have to get the bad ones out. We have to do it. We can't let that happen, and we're being very tough on law and order and crime. Number 8. Under the Trump administration, we're standing strongly behind Americans of faith, stopping the attacks on our values, our traditions, defending religious liberty like no president. I believe like no president has ever done before. Number 9. We got rid of the sinister Johnson Amendment so that pastors can speak the truth and they can speak it without having their tax-exempt status revoked. And we worked hard, and we're going to make that permanent pretty soon. I think Mike, he's referring to the, yes, Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House. But we worked hard on getting rid of the Johnson Amendment. It's gone as far as you can say anything you want. Now, if you do say something bad about Trump, I will change my mind and I will have your tax-exempt status immediately revoked. Number 10, and today I'm also pleased to announce that the Department of Education is officially issuing its new guidance to protect the right to prayer in our public schools. Number 11, we expanded the Mexico City policy to stop taxpayer dollars from being used to promote radical gender ideology all around the world, I signed an executive order to slash federal funding for any public school that pushes transgender insanity. Number 12, and my administration also rejoined the Geneva Consensus Declaration to affirm the right to sovereign nations to protect life, defend the family, and to be faithful to God. 13, we created the White House Faith Office, first time ever, which has its 1-year anniversary this month, and headed up with Paul and Jenny and some incredible people. And we created the Presidential Commission on Religious Liberty. Number 14, and I set up an official Department of Justice task force to eradicate anti-Christian bias, because you do have a lot of that. They don't talk about that. They're always talking about other religions and other different. 15, this is my favorite. We have peace in the Middle East, by the way. First time in 3,000 years, we have peace. And just in closing, the scriptures always tell us that blessed are the pure of heart. I don't know if that applies to me necessarily. I'm not so sure. I don't know. Paula, does that apply to me? I'm not sure. I try. Whew. So most of those statements reflect a clear violation of church and state. What you hear in some of those remarks is from the playbook of Christian nationalism. And I'm just going to kind of summarize some of those things that I heard in those statements. So one would be promoting, even imposing, a specific version of Christianity above all religions, all other religions, including other flavors of Christianity and no religion. Providing preferential protection for certain Christians around the world. Perpetuating the myth that the USA was founded as a Christian nation and needs to return to one nation under God. And you may already know that the National Prayer Breakfast, "In God We Trust" as a motto, and "Under God" in the Pledge of Allegiance were all added in the 50s during the Red Scare period of the Cold War with the Soviet Union. They're also trying to eliminate the Johnson Amendment that was done by executive order, but no congressional action yet. Putting adult-led prayer in public schools. Kids have always had the right to pray on their own in school, but this is something different. Singling out and attacking transgender Americans. Using federal funding to impose restrictions on reproductive health, both domestically and international. That was the reference to the Mexico City program, policy. Creating a White House Faith Office and Presidential Commission on Religious Liberty, and I think you can be fairly sure these are protecting the freedom. These are not protecting the freedoms of all religious and non-religious Americans. And then weaponizing the executive branch and especially the Department of Justice to eradicate anti-Christian bias, which I interpret to mean silencing people that don't agree with the administration. So in my view, this is a very disturbing situation. And what's behind this are the ideas of Christian nationalism. And I want to drill down on that a bit more. And to help me do that, I'm going to draw on the research of an organization called the Public Religion Research Institute, which I will refer to as PRRI. Last year, PRRI came out with the 2025 American Values Atlas. This is a very large-scale research project sampling tens of thousands of Americans across the country. And from that data, they released a report last month titled "Mapping Christian Nationalism Across the 50 States, Insights from PRRI's 2025 American Values Atlas." So I want to share with you some of the insights from that report. But first let me say that PRRI is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to conducting independent research and driving conversations at the intersection of religion, culture, and politics. So let's start with their working definition of Christian nationalism. This is actually their slide from their presentation. Now, they asked over 22,000 people how strongly they agree or disagree with these 5 statements. And I'll read them. God has called Christians to exercise dominion over all areas of American society. The U.S. government should declare America a Christian nation. Being Christian is an important part of being truly American. If the U.S. moves away from our Christian foundations, we will not have a country anymore. And U.S. laws should be based on Christian values. So respondents could either completely agree, mostly disagree, or completely disagree. They had 4 choices there, either on the agreement side or the disagreement side. And then based on which of those 4 answers they selected, they were given a score between 0 and 1. And then they averaged the scores across all 5 questions to produce a individual's scale score. So respondents who did not provide a response for at least 3 of the 5 statements were not assigned a scale score. But you can see here on the slide, these were the percent who had an agreeing answer. So from 23% up to 43% of respondents. So then they grouped respondents into one of 4 groups, depending on how many of those questions they agreed with, producing a scale of Christian nationalism. So they labeled, these were their terms, adherents scored 0.75 to 1. So they, strongly agreed or mostly agreed with nearly all of those questions. Sympathizers scored 0.5 to 0.74. Skeptics scored 0.1 to 0.49. Rejectors completely disagreed with all statements. So that's the scale. And then some of these other slides you're going to see refer to those 4 groups. Now, what percentage of the country do you think completely or mostly agreed with all of those statements? Any guesses here in the room?
30%.
30? Anybody else?
45.
45. All right. Well, here's the answer. So looking at the blue, those are either strongly agree or mostly agree. So that's about a third. Okay, and then we have another third that are the skeptics, a little more than a third, and a little less than a third are the rejectors. So we have kind of a relatively even split across these 3 groups across the country. And then 4% didn't score at all. So that's good news that only a third of our country are Christian nationalists, but bad news is that this minority is trying to impose itself on everybody else in spite of the Constitution. And what's of most interest to me are the skeptics. Those are the ones that agree with some of the statements. I don't know, maybe some in this room fall into that bucket. Skeptics are on the fence, it seems to me. Now I'm going to come back to this in our discussion, but first I want to show you some more data. Now I know this is an eye chart, but bear with me, I'll pick out some interesting information out of this. This looks at how religious traditions fall on that scale. Now there are a few things, or a few observations I want to point out here. So what you see on the left are different religious traditions, is the term they use, and across the bottom are percentages of people in that tradition that fall into these 5 categories. So at the top, we see white evangelical Protestants, Hispanic Protestants, all the way down to Buddhist, Muslim, Jewish, Hindu, unaffiliated at the bottom. And you can see by they're ranked according to how with the most Christian nationalists at the top. So one thing I saw is that there's no tradition that aligns with the country as a whole, but white mainline non-evangelical Protestants and white Catholics come the closest. They're right in the middle here. And you see how they kind of align with the national score and the hash marks across the top. Now, it's no surprise that evangelicals are the most Christian nationalists at 67%, because that's where Christian nationalism originated. 35% of mainline Protestants are Christian nationalists, and 44% are skeptics. Now, that's 79% that do not completely reject Christian nationalism, and that concerns me a bit. And it's nearly the same for white Catholics. And then notice the bottom rows of the chart. This is my question is, why are so many non-Christians, like the Buddhists, Muslims, Jewish, and Hindus, skeptical, even when those statements were all about Christianity? I think that's very curious. Yeah, a lot are rejectors, but there's still a pretty good chunk that are skeptics. Now let's look at what political beliefs correlate with the support of Christian nationalism. This slide to me is very troubling. First, it shows that 79% of Christian nationalist adherents score very high or high on the right-wing authoritarian scale. And I'll come back and talk about that scale in a minute and what that's all about. But just trust that it means you like authoritarianism. Then 58% of the sympathizers were very high or high, and 31% of skeptics and 11% of rejectors were very high or high on this right-wing authoritarian scale. So this says that someone that supports Christian nationalism is also very likely to support a right-wing authoritarian. That's 20 to 30% of the country that's okay with authoritarianism. Now, the right-wing authoritarian scale came out of studies of the horrors of fascism in the Second World War. And if there was such a thing as an authoritarian personality, psychologists wanted to understand the psychologies of fascist regimes and their followers. So this line of research produced the California F scale, where F stood for fascist. And back in 1947 is when that originally was created. And then the right-wing authoritarian scale was developed in 1981 as a revision of the fascist scale that improved its statistical properties. This test consists of 22 opinions, and for each you must indicate how much you agree or disagree with those 22 opinions. This test is available on the web for anyone to take. When I learned about it, I took it. It was quite interesting. The test's definition of right-wing authoritarianism is as follows. Right-wing authoritarianism is characterized by obedience to authority, moral absolutism, racial and ethnic prejudice, and intolerance and punitiveness towards dissidents and deviants. All right, let's go to the next slide. This slide summarizes some of the other policies or ideas that are supported by Christian nationalist adherents. And I'll just kind of go through each bar there. 67% of adherents favor internment camps for illegal aliens. 48% oppose birthright citizenship, which is in our Constitution. 73% think Trump should be given the power he needs. 67% favor stripping citizenship if deemed a threat. 67% think immigrants are invading our country and replacing our cultural and ethnic background. And 61% support deportation without due process. I'm not making this stuff up. This came from surveys of Americans, tens of thousands of people. So, and this is something. This is not something that's only happening in Washington, D.C. But does it really affect us here in southern Colorado? Well, yes, it does. And I have several examples of how Christian nationalism is affecting our region right now. So I've just got some icons up here I'm going to talk about. So in 2022, Woodland Park elected a slate of Christian Nationalist School Board candidates endorsed by Andrew Womack of Charis Bible College and his Truth and Liberty coalition as part of a plan to take control of the school and the city government. To take control of the school and the city government up there. Womack did this as part of the Seven Mountains Mandate. Is anybody familiar with that? Have you all heard of that, I'm sure? That preaches that Christians should achieve dominion over the seven mountains of society, which are family, religion, education, media, arts and entertainment, business, and government. So that whole election and the results created a lot of upheaval in Woodland Park and financial woes in the school district that they're still dealing with today. But fortunately, in last November's election, a bipartisan interfaith coalition of locals decisively beat back the onslaught of Christian nationalism and removed those Christian nationalists from the school board and replaced them with much more moderate candidates. And if you're interested, journalist Logan W. Davis has reported on this extensively in the Colorado Times Recorder. And our organization had him come speak back in November, and he talked about that and a number of other things. But he's done some great writing there. Now we have Riverstone Academy. This is a charter school in Pueblo that describes itself as Colorado's first Christian public elementary school. Now, Christian and public school should never go together in the same sentence. This school is privately contracted by Education Re-envisioned Board of Cooperative Education Services, a mouthful, but it's one of those BOCES organizations that is used by school districts to provide shared services. And that BOCES is associated with District 49 in Colorado Springs and District 70 in Pueblo County. This school is now suing to obtain public education funding for their sectarian school, and they seem to be hoping to make this a national test case. They're doing this in a couple of other places around the country. I read about one in Tennessee recently where they're also trying to get a test case up to the Supreme Court. Our FFRF attorneys sent a letter to District 49 in October requesting that they immediately cease funding for Riverstone Academy to comply with the First Amendment. The attorney that wrote that letter will be here in town on March 25th to speak later this month. And you're all invited to attend. I'll put up a slide later with the details of that speaker event. Now, in good news, residents in School District 49 flipped a Christian nationalist majority on the board in the November election. The new board recently repealed a policy targeting transgender students in restrooms that had been enacted by the previous board. Cheryl and I were actually there that night. It was pretty cool to see. And then School District 11, though, last year passed policies targeting LGBTQ youth by restricting sports participation by biological sex and restricting pride flags in classrooms. Even Colorado Springs City Council showed its Christian nationalist tendencies when it approved a Charlie Kirk Remembrance Day resolution last October after refusing to issue a Pride Month proclamation in June. So let me sum this up so we can get to our discussion. This data shows that Christian nationalism leads to some very unconstitutional ideas. The data shows there are people in our country who are strong adherents to Christian nationalism and authoritarianism, and I'm dubious of the ability of the adherents to change their minds. I hope I'm wrong. On the other end of the spectrum, there are about as many people that reject Christian nationalism outright. What interests me are the people in the middle of the scale, the skeptics, that mostly agree with maybe two statements, but maybe mostly disagree with the other three, or some similar combination. This was the largest group at 37%. And it would seem that many of these folks are mainline Christians or white Catholics. So given that, I want to put up some discussion questions. This is my warm-up question. Get the conversation going. So did any of this information change your perception of Christian nationalism? Anybody? Now, I know y'all are pretty well versed on Christian nationalism and are generally in opposition to it. So I'm not terribly surprised that nobody's raising their hand and saying, "Oh, this was all new to me."
I think what's new is all the information about the skeptics and sympathizers, and in the middle, that's new information. What Christian nationalists believe.
Yeah, I think we tend to, like a lot of things, we tend to polarize everything and see people on both extremes, but there's also people kind of in this middle, as you point out.
Question?
Yes, ma'am.
I am curious as to what your definition of Christian values is, because I would probably fall under the skeptics in the sense that, I think Christian values are important in government, but what I call Christian values are things like loving your neighbor and honesty and following the teachings of Jesus Christ, justice and mercy. Those are my interpretation of Christian values. I'm not sure that your survey or the survey that was done would call those Christian values.
It's a very interesting point, and that PRRI did not define Christian values in their statement, but that was probably intentional because that allows the reader to apply their own interpretation of that. And I think you hit the nail right on the head when you point out that there are widely different interpretations of what Christian values mean. You have your own. We know that many Christian nationalists claim values that we heard about today, about kicking people out of the country and targeting LGBTQ folks and all kinds of hateful things that many of us would not put in the same bucket as Christian values.
Exactly.
So that's the root of the problem. When you have something that is so vaguely defined, how can you run a country off this? It means now someone has to define that. Someone has to interpret what that means. And that's one of the major reasons I think we have church-state separation, is so that we can all have a shared set of values based on our contract with each other, which is the Constitution, and we can leave the interpretation of specific values to our lawmakers to respond to the needs of the folks. So we can have Christian values in our laws, but it's filtered through our public process of legislation. That's how I look at it. Yes.
I'm curious as to when this awareness of Christian nationalism sort of began to be documented. My parents were both teachers coming from very small towns in Nebraska. They taught in small communities in Nebraska before the war broke out and he went into the Air Force. But when did people become aware of it and start studying it? Whether it may be an early text where people are saying, oh, guess what? In the United States, we've got Christian nationalists, and this is what they are.
I'm not sure when the term actually became popularized. I would imagine it's in the last decade or so. But the movement itself has been documented back to the 70s and primarily in the 80s was when we saw the moral majority and some of these religious right organizations come out of the evangelical movement and started connecting with politics and influencing who got elected for president. I'm reading a book currently about this very topic, and it actually started with the Carter administration, with, interestingly, some of these, an evangelical movement trying to get Jimmy Carter out of office. They opposed Jimmy Carter, which, as a staunch Southern Baptist, was very contradictory, but they didn't like his politics. So they were involved in getting Reagan elected. And So it's a long, complex history, but it is very interesting.
It's recent, though.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's recent.
Mhm. Any other comments before we dig into a little deeper here?
Is in Christian Nationalism, President Father Coughlin.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't get what you said.
Father Coughlin in the 30s.
Oh, okay.
That's
I'm not familiar with him.
I think.
Yeah, he was a radio host. Yeah, he was quite popular.
The America First campaign with the flyer, what's his name? Lindbergh. Lindbergh.
Yeah.
If we go back to colonial times, we see that there were various groups that came and settled places, and one of them that be a certain flavor of Christianity. In Maryland, it started out as it was given to a Catholic royal nobility, and eventually became more Protestant, and then they moved the capital from a Catholic area to the
Yeah, I mean, we see that in the pilgrims that came, you know, as to escape religious persecution. But they were also very strict about their own religious views and how they treated their own people. So yeah, I think pre-constitutional times, we see a lot of various strong religious movements within the colonies, and then we see that kind of coalesce to protection against having that influence the government. Because there were there were too many different views. I think our founders understood that they'd seen the mayhem caused by religion in Europe and wanted to avoid that. So the separation of church and state became one of our best new ideas built into the Constitution.
But some of those ideas may never have totally gone away, even though Jefferson, in Virginia first, and then in the Constitution got in the amendments, got in the right to freedom of religion. It may have been an undercurrent always.
Yeah. Okay, now on this one I've got 3 different questions because they're all related, but I'm going to read through these. So, do moderate Christians generally understand what Christian nationalism is? And I'm looking at the broader moderate Christian community, not just the folks in this church or in this room. Or conversely, do they have an incorrect understanding of Christian nationalism? Maybe because they see the term as meaning, oh, I'm Christian and I love my country, so what's wrong with Christian nationalism? Or does the fact that the name for this phenomenon, because it includes the word Christian, cause some people to downplay it or just ignore this threat? And would some moderate Christians be inclined to reject Christian nationalism if they had a better understanding of the connection between Christian nationalism and religious authoritarianism, as you saw in the data here? So those are my questions to you. So anybody want to take a stab at any of those? Sure.
To establish a barometer, what is your definition of Christian nationalism?
Well, I'm using what the PRRI organization listed with those 5 questions at the beginning, and I can flip back to those. So this is how they statistically built this study with these 5 statements, and then people got to agree or disagree with them. So by PRRI's definition, if you strongly agree with all 5 of these, you're definitely Christian nationalist. If you mostly agree with most of these, I think you're still going to be Christian nationalism. You're going to be a sympathizer. So that's how I would answer that question, using their definition.
I think most people do not realize what it means. I think they see, for that big swath in the middle, the skeptics, they're kind of in between. You see the word Christian, maybe they identify as Christian. You see the word nationalism, they think, I love my nation, sure. In the same way that the term liberal democracy people don't realize what that actually means. It has nothing to do with being a Democrat and being in favor of democracy. Right? It's a political term.
It's an academic historical
It's an academic
term,
term that has a lot of subtext to it. I think a lot of people just don't even realize what they're signing up for.
yeah. And well, that's my concern, is that a lot of people either kind of ignore the term because of just the terminology that's used there. And there's some discussion that's going on. And when we had our speaker in November, there was a bit of an audience discussion about that very point. Should we be using a different term than Christian nationalism to describe this? And
That's a good point.
you know, a lot of people thought we should. There's some terms been coined, but nothing's really stuck yet. So
What, can you remember off the top of your head some of the alternatives that have been considered?
no, I can't. Carol,
Okay.
do you remember? No, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Brandon.
Maybe that's a good reason why they didn't stick.
Is there, did you capture age of the participant who took the survey?
Speak up, please.
Yeah.
Capture age.
Age.
Yeah, so was the age captured in this data? They used, it was all adults, but I think,
Adults meaning 18 and over?
yeah,
Okay.
I believe so.
Because I think so I'm in my mid-30s, when I talk to my friends, they seem to know what Christian nationalism is and the attachment to authoritarianism. But when I talk to my parents,
Yes.
they don't, they think, you know, I think they land, even though I actually think their beliefs are much more in the skeptics, I think if they took this thinking Christian and a patriot to this country, their parents died in different wars, so they feel a deep connection to patriotism because they lost family. I think they actually would fall under sympathizer, even though I think their true values are more in the skeptic. So just thinking about number two, I think looking at potentially, I think the word Christian nationalism with a younger audience is more geared towards that authoritarianism versus, I mean, of course, this is just my, you know, what I've seen. But yeah, so.
I think that's a really interesting point about the age breakdown and understanding, and this doesn't really address that. I've seen some other studies from other organizations that do look at how different ages process, you know, Christian nationalism, these terms, and you know, it's pretty clear that younger generations are less likely to become involved in religion in the first place now. And I think part of the explanation I've seen for that is that they associate now, or what they're seeing with Christian nationalism is a religious association with these authoritarian ideas, and people say, I don't want to be part of that, so they're just walking away from all religion altogether. And I think it comes from having that deeper understanding. So, it's a good point. Yes?
One thing I noticed, and I wanted to get your take on this, it seemed that the authoritarian policy supporters were somewhere around 2/3, well over half. And that seemed out of alignment with the beliefs, which ended up with a lot of skeptics in the middle.
Well, when I was talking about the percentages that supported those different authoritarian policies, I was talking specifically about the adherents. So the Christian, the strongest Christian nationalists.
Sorry.
So of that group, which was about 1/3 of the country, you know,
Yeah.
73% still think, you know,
I missed that part, sorry.
Yeah, it's a key point. Question in the back?
Yeah, my question has to do with, well, actually 2 and 3, 4, maybe 2 and 4. It seems that many people really don't know what this means, don't really understand what's going on. And I was particularly struck in the fall, was it, or in last May, was it, when we had the session here, the
Project 2025
Yeah,
sessions, yeah.
the place was packed. And a lot of people from town came, and they had, it appeared to me from their questions that they didn't know anything about this. And they wanted to, what can we do now, is what they were asking, right? And so I guess the basic question is, how can we provide venues for people to learn about this if they don't, if they're focused on Fox News, for example, and they wouldn't hear it there. I'm thinking of my aunt, who watches Fox News all the time, and she probably doesn't know. I've never asked her about this, but she probably has no idea what it is. So I guess that's the question: how do you get the word out, and getting people to really, take notice?
And that's part of my ulterior motive from having this conversation with you, because I want to understand a different side of it. I want to understand, we're a free thinkers organization, so we don't necessarily go talking to churches a lot. And this is a very unique situation. But one of the things we're thinking about is, should we attempt to do that? Should we try to have more of these conversations and put up this data? This is not our data. This is coming from another good source, and try to do a little more education across the region. And that's part of our mission in our local chapter, is to provide education for some of these topics. Christian nationalism is the big topic to be educating folks on, not only ourselves, but the community in general. And First Congregational has done a great job of that. I want to add one more point. I'll come back to your questions. I spoke to my mom about this very topic, kind of related to what you were saying with your aunt. So my mom's 90. She's gone to church her whole life. I asked her how First Christian would relate to having this kind of information. Do they even talk about it in church? And her answer was, no, they really don't talk about these kind of topics. It's almost a taboo subject, because they're very concerned about mixing politics and religion. So it's off the table, and she's not sure they would even entertain a session like this. So even though it's a very moderate, even liberal on the Protestant scale denomination, there's that taboo out there that exists. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I agree with you. The people in the skeptics, the ones in the middle, are the most concerning, really, for anything, because they're skeptical, either way, one or the other way.
Yeah.
And it would seem, I think they just give up and just like, okay, and forget it. But I just like people don't vote sometimes because they don't, and they don't even bother, I think, sometimes to educate themselves or to research it or anything. They just give up. And so we've got to try to inform them and talk to, at least try to, give them at least the facts that we know.
Yeah, my hypothesis is that the skeptics don't have as deep of understanding of what Christian nationalism is all about. Therefore, they are skeptic. They're kind of on the fence. They may agree with some and not all, but
they don't care.
Maybe, yeah. Any other comments? Yes, ma'am. Jerry.
Just wanting your opinion. Do you think that Christian nationalism is somewhat based on fear?
A lot based on fear.
Yes, I do. I think, and this is just my opinion, that from what I've read, I think it originates with people feeling like their religion is being sidelined. And I know this doesn't apply to all Christians, but I think it was a particular evangelical movement within Christianity that felt like the direction of the country as a whole, which was being reflected in our laws and policies, was making them sidelined. They didn't have the influence they had in the past. And I think that fear was driving more interaction with politics and led to what we have today. Yes, sir.
I would further subject that violence is justified by that fear.
Yeah, that's where that authoritarianism aspect comes up. If you don't agree with me, I'm just gonna, throw you in jail. That's the most extreme aspect of it. Jerry, you had a question?
Well,
Or
actually,
a comment?
Wes, could you go back to that very first slide where you had the five?
The 5 points?
Yeah, the 5 points. I think one of the difficulties is that there's a definition of Christianity and what Christian means. I think that many of us Christians have ceded to the right wing of political groups in the U.S. definition of Christianity that is foreign to what we feel as Christianity. I mean, if you think about other nations like Canada or Denmark or the Netherlands or Finland, whose government, I think, acts in a Christian way, at least our feeling about what Christianity means. But those things would be anathema to many of the folks who would be described as Christian nationalists. I just don't think that the definition, what people think when they use the word Christian, is really what we believe Christianity to be about. My wife found a refrigerator magnet that said, "Dear Jesus, protect us from the fall." But that people talk about going to the Holy Land, and I often think if we're going to define some place as Holy Land, I think about Scandinavia. That's a part of the world where people really, I believe, really understand what our devotion to each other should be.
Yeah.
So that's not really a question.
No, well, I've got a follow-up discussion point that you're kind of hitting at with this whole idea of these different aspects of Christianity and whose definition, should win. I mean, there's so many different denominations because nobody agrees on what Christianity is or means. Everybody, wants to have their own little specific version of it. So, but yeah, we'll hit on that some more. There's a couple of other comments.
You probably already said this, but I missed it. Are these the only five questions that were asked to determine where you are on the scale?
Yes.
So if I answered, and the first question referred to this, if I answered U.S. law should be based on Christian values like honesty, integrity, kindness, would that put me in the skeptic? 1 out of 5, would that put me in the skeptic?
Yes.
Okay, that's where I am then. And then also, it's interesting to me, like the question I would stumble on probably the most about our Christian, if the U.S. moves away from our Christian foundations. Now, if that meant Christian principles like honesty and kindness and generosity, that's one thing. If it meant that the founders meant to set up a Christian nation, that's another thing altogether.
Yes, and that's a real good point because that's what we hear a lot from the Christian nationalists, saying, "Oh, this was a Christian nation. It was founded by Christian founders and all that." And there's a lot of misinformation there. So I think Christian nationalists would probably interpret it one way, where you might interpret another. But that also kind of gets to this whole issue of there's no one hard definition there.
Perhaps, Wendy, there's some hope to be had with the skeptic group then.
Absolutely.
Because if that swath of people like yourself is saying, well, it's kind of squishy, I don't know how these terms are defined, then maybe we can derive some hope in getting some of those people.
I don't think it's that we're apathetic necessarily.
It's hard to
and
know
if
what
it had
that
said, U.S. laws should be based on Jewish values, I'm okay with that. Also, and probably a bunch of other values,
And I would also make the argument that many of our laws, the same things, about we don't want to be murdering people, we want to take care of our neighbors. Those are humanist principles.
Yes,
so
right.
I would see them the same way.
I'm okay with that.
And so if we all bring our ideas to the table, we don't have to call them Christian values. We can just call them American values. This is what we believe as a nation, and that's why I would reject that statement, because it's more than just Christian values. And who defines what Christian values are? I don't want somebody telling me, that this is the way it has to be because this is what it says in the Bible, and that's what we're going to believe. And that's what the authoritarians are doing. All right, I'm going to move on. Great discussion.
I think they have pretty good values. Especially with raising kids.
I want to go to the second one. I'll read both of them, but I want to focus on the second one. Are moderate Christians open to learning more about Christian nationalism? We've talked about that a little bit, and I think I'm interested in more opinions, but should moderate Christians be calling out other Christians that are promoting Christian nationalism, or are they already doing that? My perception is they're not. Moderate Christians are not calling out the hard-right evangelicals that are driving a lot of this. And should there be? I know that's kind of a taboo within Christianity. Nobody wants to, criticize another part of the brotherhood of Christianity, but
or if you don't believe it would do any good, then why go there?
Yeah. Is it going to create more problem? So I don't know. It's a very tricky thing to do that, but that's what I think you were getting at a little bit, Jerry, on the fact that one part of Christianity is defining it for the whole nation right now.
Yes.
And they want to impose that definition on everybody. I certainly don't want that. Yes?
I guess I'm not agreeing with your belief that moderate Christians are not calling out other Christians, because there are examples. There was a Southern Baptist minister who was kicked out of the Southern Baptist Convention because he refused to disallow gay people in his congregation. If you go to the Indivisible protest the end of this month, there will be multiple ordained ministers who will stand up and speak at that Indivisible and have in the past. But I think the other thing is that we need to acknowledge the reality that confrontation does not win people over to your idea, okay? The way we're going to win people over is by demonstrating our belief of Christian values and by talking about our belief of Christian values without confronting people and calling them homophobic or calling them racist, because they don't believe they are. And I think we need to look realistically at what works.
Well, what you said made me think of a recent clip. I saw a video clip of James Tallarico and Lauren Boebert on a TV program. And so, both Christians. Lauren Boebert talked her Christian nationalism spot, and James Tallarico, in a beautiful way, refuted everything he said without attacking her directly. But he basically just shot down all of her points. And I think that's maybe the great example of an approach.
Last question, Wes?
We're about out of time, I think.
Yeah, I'm afraid we are. So last question.
I just wanted to say really quick to your statement. I agree that I think that most Christian nationalists, you're not going to convince them they're not homophobic or racist or anything. But I do think that there's a very small percentage of everyday churchgoers who can speak in the way that Tallarico does, right? That's a gift that he's been given that unfortunately many of us don't have. But I do think when you call out someone, and it doesn't have to be in a horrific, mean-spirited way, but I think when you call out, which could even just be correcting, so to speak, somebody, I don't think it's for the benefit of that person. I think it's for the benefit of all the people watching, because I think it allows all those other people to go, oh, so there are other versions of Christianity that I haven't actually been exposed to because maybe I grew up in this area and only had a lot of Christian nationalism or evangelical Christians. So I think it's less about trying to change the mind of the person that you're talking to, and much more about trying to show the onlookers that there is, like, sure, you can agree with this person, or, you know, there's a whole other version of Christianity that you should be aware of. So I think that that's like what I would think about, you know, because I do agree, you're not convincing anyone into something new, you know.
Well, thank you all for having me today. It's been a pleasure. Sonny Lawrence is the attorney that's coming from FFRF National to talk about education and some of the legal aspects of what's going on here. Some of those same cases I talked about, Riverstone Academy, and James Irwin Charter School. We just had a big win there. They were teaching creationism, and they were called out, and they totally stopped it. So there's a QR code will help you find the event to SVP, or let me know if you want to. I have cards here if anybody wants to know how to contact me.
I can't think of where, but I saw a wonderful program about Japanese schools in terms of learning nutrition. I'd already seen one of our students with a project last year about the schools and developing kids. A lot of times they go to classrooms.
Thank you, Joe.
They go and thank the cooks.
Thank you, Joe, for this recommendation.
Back
Everybody is given
I can't be that Christian, and I don't know how to
well, you already know I'm a big enthusiast about the Japanese.
We're just want to make sure everybody has a fair chance.
It's not true, but I think they work for
Jimmy got a nice idea.
12 kids, 0 to 6 years old.
Thank you. Jim Freeman. Good to see you.
Hey, David.
I go to Chicago.
Morning. Good to see you. Good to see you. I didn't want to miss out.
Yeah, this is training for a while for this work here.
Yeah.
Okay, so now,
different things that kids get.
So about you?
And that was when I was on some committee when I started kids about.
I didn't think you
Outside the
I appreciate, hey,
Yeah, you guys can get up and
I will take full credit.
fun.
I'll take full credit.
There's a chance.
As opposed to minor
Some of the folks like
I have a really small point. At the very beginning,
They were thinking they're breaking up.
at the very beginning, you mentioned about, I just remember when Under God was put into the Constitution, 1984. That began on one, I was a kid there, 11 years old.
saw it firsthand.
And God we trust.
Yes, for a while.
Yes, we did not have a God we trust.
I'm a part of the election. See, I was counting myself a year ago.
I don't think it's came back. I think it was there because I have a legal sense in my own mind. It's just a small.
Your whole they just aware of it.
Anyway, keep it popular.
I don't want to she's doing classes.